I'm Eric Lipsy, and this is Galt University. Today, I'm here with Charles Wright of Centennial Lending. How are you today, Charles?
Oh, Eric, I'm great. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that I know comes up often with real estate investors, and I figured you were a great person to come on to shed some light on the differences with commercial lending, maybe even land leasing or purchasing land, or even a construction loan. So maybe if you could start by telling us a little bit of what the differences is between those loans.
Yeah, sure, you bet. And so most people think of home loans, and a lot of people have bought a house, and very simply, you're leveraging some money to go buy a large dollar item, and the process is pretty simple, and we've all been through it. And, as a lender, we're going to check your ability to pay, make sure you have some income, and make sure you have a history of paying on time, credit, make sure you have some assets set aside and you can afford it, and very traditional way of lending, same, car loan and a home loan, very similar. A commercial property is on a high level very similar in the sense that we're doing the same exact thing. We're figuring out what the collateral looks like, your ability to repay, if you have a history to pay things back. But on a commercial loan, we also want the building, the entity, that the company to be able to afford the loan. And so we're looking for the entity that's going to eventually own this commercial space to be able to pay back the loan either by its earnings or by leveraging earnings from other sub entities. And so we take one extra step when we do a commercial loan, and then we take a look at the business's cash flow and try to see that the business is going to be able to sustain the debt on the property. And so we do a lot of commercial loans for commercial buildings. Company, you and I might go together, and we might want to buy storage units, or we might want to buy a restaurant, or we might want to buy a mixed use condo that has people that pay rents. And then so as a lender, we're taking a look at that property and saying, okay, Eric's a good guy, Charles is a good guy. They look like they have a history of paying bills back, paying their loans back. That's important. But now let's take a look at the property. And so the money that we're lending on the property, are the rents that they're receiving from that property going to generate enough income to pay for itself and substantiate the loan that we're doing? And that's commercial lending in a nutshell. That's commercial real estate lending, and that's really our forte.
Okay.
Construction loans, very similar to that, although slightly different. A construction loan is very much a fancy line of credit. You homeowners at home have home equity lines of credit, or even though you people that are out there that have credit cards. A construction loan literally is just someone managing draws on a line of credit to manage a construction project. So the house or building or whatever is being built piece by piece by piece by piece. So then you arrive at an endpoint where your line of credit is used up, the building is complete. You have a short-term temporary loan that is completed, refinanced into some longer-term commercial loan, some longer-term mortgage type loan. The construction loan for residential construction, the process is a little more detailed in the sense that for us in Centennial Lending, when we're looking at that, we want to make sure the contractors are legit. We want to make sure that there are actual plans and architectural plans. We want to make sure everything is up to snuff with the city or the municipality where you're building. We're going to pay contractors directly as work is being done, and so we don't want any contractors not to get paid and potential liens later on. We're going to manage the draw process and manage the budget process so people stay on budget. And we're going to try to arrive at an endpoint at some future date. This could be 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, 12 months, 2 years farther down the road, depending on the project, where we are completed with the project. We have a final certificate from the municipality saying, yes, everything is done. All the contractors have been paid. Everything is taken care of. And now we have the ability to get rid of the short-term financing and then put it in the long-term financing. Big commercial construction, small residential properties, fixer-uppers of your house, home improvements and all that. It's all essentially the same process, just the numbers are bigger or smaller.
Okay.
And then I think you mentioned land loans, and land loans are very similar. We handle land loans, I don't think uniquely, but we look at land loans. There's really two kinds. There's speculative land loans. So that's maybe you and I are getting together and we're buying multiple acres with the idea that we're going to develop that at some point in the future. And then there's individual land loans where maybe I'm going to go buy a house up in the mountains. We live in Colorado, and I want to go build a condo up there, or I want to build a house up there, and I'm going to buy a lot, and then I'm going to go through that same construction loan process and end up at a final piece. And so our organization does short-term land loans. They're usually amortized over 15 or 20 years, and we usually have some kind of call feature at 5 or 7 years with the idea that people are going to use these to go build properties. A lot of other institutions will do loans for larger chunks of lands, farms, acreages, and all that. And so you're typically on a land loan putting a little bit more down. They're a little bit more risky. And so those are usually 50, 40, 30% down type loans. Construction loans are usually 20, 25% down, somewhere in there. Commercial loans about the same.
Okay. All right, so now we're looking at, let's look at the DTI. So is there DTI? I'm sure there is consideration with commercial or land. I know they all work pretty much the same, but the debt to income.
Yeah, so they all, that's a good question. They all pretty much work the same. I kind of mentioned it before. It's think of it this way: the lender, the entity lending you money wants to know that they are going to get their money paid back, right? No lender ever wants to foreclose on a property. No lender ever wants to make a phone call and say, "Hey, Eric, why haven't you paid your bills on time? Send me this extra money," right? All the lenders are looking at, and it's a funny way to think about it, right? But the lenders are looking at a transaction saying, what could possibly go wrong with this transaction farther on down the line? And then building kind of a risk rating in there and saying, yes, I'm okay with this risk, and no, I'm not okay with this risk. And debt to income, or the ability to repay your loan, is really a piece of that. And traditionally, mortgage world lives around 40 or 50% of their debt to income. Commercial world and land loan world is really about the same. And in our world, we want all your bills, your monthly bills, to equal about 50% of what you make or better, right? On commercial, it's the same kind of idea. Remember, I said we want the entity to be able to pay the loan back. We want the entity to be able to make at least 100% of what it's going to take to cover the debt, usually more like 120%. And then we want the personal people to be able to cover their debts 2 to 1, or to have about a 50% debt to income ratio. And those numbers are a little bit loose. Stronger borrowers with better credit and more assets and more reserves, those numbers get a little bit higher. Tighter borrowers or more leveraged borrowers, those numbers get a little bit lower. Yeah, somewhere right around there. And we're typically looking at pay stubs and tax returns, and it would be very hard to get a substantial loan in this modern world without providing your tax returns and providing current pay stubs. Same thing goes for a commercial loan. We're looking for 2 or 3 years worth of tax returns on the businesses, all entities tied into the businesses. We're looking for current profit and loss statements, and we're looking to go build that picture to see what the real cash flows are. But again, long answer to a short question. We really want you to be able to cover your debts about 2 to 1, about 50%.
Okay. How long does the seasoning for that business have to be for that income before you all consider doing the loan, if that makes sense?
Great question. A lot of lending is I'm going to answer a question like that with, it depends. So mortgage lending, home buying, first mortgages, second mortgages, things like that, you really want to be able to build, it's mostly a 2-year world, but you really want to be able to build a history that makes sense, right? If a person's come out of college and they've got their first job and they have a history of this first job, that makes a lot of sense. And that seems, so if they qualify, that seems to work. And we want to have this make sense income. Or if you had a job and you changed to a different job and you changed to a different job, it doesn't really matter that you've changed jobs so much. It's, do you have a history, and does that history make sense, right? In commercial world, it's a little tighter, right? So we want a little more of a history of the company being in business and being successful. At least that's the way we operate. And so mortgage world really lives in about a 2-year world. Again, it depends. But then in commercial world, it really is about a 3-year world. And so we want to see that a company is alive, sustainable, making money, it has a viable plan, and it's just not something that popped up out of the blue that's trying to leverage a lot of money. And you get those requests a lot. And so it's one of those funny things where you have to kind of do your research and make sure you have all the proper information to kind of paint yourself a true picture of what's happening out there and what's really going on with the entity or what's going on with the company. And again, it all depends, right? So a brand new organization, you would think, okay, they don't have 3 years worth of history, but if that's a person that's running it comes from a long history of that, that's a compensating factor, and maybe we can waive that. Or if a company has bumps in the road or certain one-off unique instances that are happening, typically we're going to go factor that into our loan decision about how we're doing it. But very simply, high level, again, long answers, short questions. Mortgage world is 2 years, commercial world is 3 years, and that's pretty much across the board.
Great. Thank you. Now let's shift to talk about credit score a little bit. Now I know that you're probably personally liable for the loan as well. Well, then again, I don't know if like a company like Apple buying a big commercial piece of real estate, if they would have anybody signed on personally. So how does it work as far as business credit? Because I know you can set up business credit through the Better Business Bureau or something like that. How does business credit come into play when dealing with commercial loans for properties?
Sure. So in our lending world, we're looking for personal guarantees on everything. So we're typically not lending to large C corps like Apple, right? So think of that C corp Apple as a single entity, and it's easier to understand. So I'm lending to Apple as a corporation, but I'm lending to Eric and Chuck to go build a storage units, right?
Right.
And so when we're looking at a loan transaction, the credit score, it's important, but it's probably not the end all be all that the modern world makes it out to be, right? If you're paying your bills on time, if you have always paid your bills on time, your credit score is a non-issue and you shouldn't have to worry about it. And you can go out and get free credit bureaus if you really want to go check that. And we have people that call us all the time asking those questions. Honestly, if you're paying your bills on time, it's a non-issue and you shouldn't have to worry about it. Now, how's that factor into commercial? Well, most of the entities that we're lending to are small business owners, right? Our lending is typically $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million type properties. And so these are your neighbors that own 5 to 10 unit apartment complexes, and they own their shops, and they own their, I keep saying storage units or gas stations and all that. And those entities, we're looking for personal guarantees. And so we're checking the business and making sure the business is up to snuff, obviously making money, paying everything on time. We look for Better Business Bureau ratings and all that. But then we're also looking at the personal guarantors' credit ratings and seeing how their credit looks, and we factor that into our decision. And so credit matters, and credit matters a lot. But if you have good credit, don't worry about it. It's not an issue.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. Well, thank you very much for coming on today to share with us. Is there anything else that's dealing with the commercial or land space that I might not have asked about that you might be able to share with us?
Yeah, don't make it more confusing than it has to be.
Okay.
On a very high level, it's a very simple transaction, just like I said at the very beginning, which is, do you have the capacity to make the payment? Have you made your payments on time in the past? Do you have the collateral, or do you have the assets to be able to afford the down payment or to put some skin in the game when you're doing these transactions, right? There are lots of lenders out there that are very willing to help and walk you through a process, right? And so it'd be, if you're interested in buying a commercial building, or if you're looking at buying rentals, rental properties are very popular, especially in the Colorado Front Range area where we live. If you're thinking about buying a rental, if you're thinking about buying a commercial building, or if you're a business owner and it's time for you to maybe take that next step and buy a building, reach out to your local financial institution, someone like us, someone like your local credit union, someone like your local bank. You have bank accounts somewhere, reach out to those people as an initial call and say, hey, I'm thinking about this, help me understand what's going on, and then let an expert walk you through the process. Doesn't cost you anything. People are usually very eager to help. That's their job, honestly, and they can walk you through the whole process. And then the other side of that is, if you don't quite get it or you don't quite understand it, don't rush into it and don't move forward. Stop and slow down and take a half step backward and make sure you have all your questions answered and make sure you understand the pros and cons of what you're doing. So we have lots of small businesses, single owner entities, doctor's offices, dentist offices that are buying their buildings. We have plumbers that are buying their shops. We have investors like you and I that might go buy multi-unit rental houses, or people that own multiple rentals and multiple LLCs. It seems confusing, but then once you get a little bit of an expert in there and have them explain how the system works, it should be very clear before you make that decision. And so just ask for a little bit of help, get a little bit of advice, and then shop around a little bit and make sure you're getting the right deal. And I think that's it.
Well, that's the perfect segue into my final question. And that is, if the audience wants to reach out to Centennial Lending, wants to talk with Charles, what's the best way for them to contact you all?
Yeah, that's great. Well, we have a website like everybody else, centennial-lending.com. Been around for 22 years now, and would love to have a conversation with anybody about that. And my name is Charles Wright. You can ask anybody when you call in and ask for Charles, and I'm the only one. You can always send me an email, cwright@centennial-lending.com. So charles.wright, centennial-lending.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. And certainly love having theory conversations about, hey, how can we structure something? How can we get something done? Centennial may not always be the right fit for you, but I can at least have a chat with you about how maybe you structure something and then point you in the right direction on where to go.
All right. Well, thank you again, Charles, for coming on to share your knowledge with us today. It's most certainly appreciated. I think it's really going to help some people kind of breathe a little bit, knowing that it's not as complicated as it might seem on the surface. So thank you again for that.
Yep. Thanks, Eric. And like I said before, you have a lot of people that want to help. Reach out, start that conversation. That's the initial step, and then see what happens from there.